Welcome back to the Schmidt Show. I'm Mike Schmidt, former Multnomah County District Attorney, father of a future fencing superstar. I mean, he's only on the third day of summer camp, but I really think that this is going to be the one that sticks. Oh, and part-time podcast host. Today, we're going to revisit the topic that kicked off season 3 a month earlier than we expected: prosperity, which is a nice framing for what much of the conversation is actually about, which is taxes. In some ways, it's natural, predictable even, that when affordability is ever present in our minds, the choice to order out or cook in for dinner, comparison shopping at grocery stores for deals, hunting for the gas station with the lowest prices, it's just natural that tax policy is also going to dominate the conversation. The question of who gets to frame that debate, though, is still very much being wrestled over. Big businesses looking to return more value to shareholders, small businesses trying to weather international tempests caused by our insane tariff policy, and individual earners wondering why their tax obligation is bigger than the billionaire in the White House when they're only making $40,000 a year. Or from the state's perspective, the revenue forecast projecting a down or flat revenue, while inflation keeps driving up our labor and material costs, leading to structural budget deficits. The framing matters. Today, I get to talk to a leader from an organization dedicated to providing good information that policymakers can use, and to framing these issues from the point of view of Oregon's most vulnerable. Juan Carlos Ordonez, Communications Director of the Oregon Center for Public Policy, will be joining me. He's got a problem with how the Prosperity Council's report is being sold. In a recent piece for the Oregon Capital Chronicle, he called it a bait and switch, a document that raises the alarm about middle-class Oregonians paying too much in taxes, then turns around and recommends tax cuts that are mostly benefiting the wealthy and corporations, reinstating a tax break for investors making over $1 million a year, weakening the estate tax, and broader-based revenue sources. So today we're going to pressure test both sides of what the OCPP, the Oregon Center for Public Policy, are arguing and agree with in this report, and where do they part ways? And if the governor had handed this assignment to Juan Carlos and his team instead of a room full of business leaders, what would Oregon's prosperity plan actually look like? Juan Carlos Ordonez, welcome to the show. Let's get into it. Juan Carlos Ordonez, thank you so much for being on the pod. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me on the show. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm really excited to talk to you. As you know, we kicked off our season this year, season 3, with one of the co-chairs of the Oregon Prosperity Council. And they put out a report and have recommendations for how the state of Oregon is going to reach prosperity. You work for the Oregon Center for Public Policy. You also have looked at the prosperity report. And so I'm so excited to talk to you today and learn more about the Oregon Center for Public Policy, but also your take on the report. So why don't we start with who are you and tell us about the center?
Yeah, the Oregon Center for Public Policy is a nonpartisan research organization. We analyze, research, tax, budget, and economic policy with the goal of advancing economic opportunity for all Oregonians, especially low and moderate income Oregonians who are struggling the most in this economy. And the areas where we focus the most on is tax policy, because the tax system plays an absolutely central role in determining whether we have an economy where everybody can benefit or only the few at the top. We also look at policies that try to advance policies that increase worker power so that workers are able to come together and bargain collectively for higher wages and better benefits. Because again, that plays a huge role in determining whether the economy is working for all of us. And lastly, we focus on policies that increase economic security. And especially in recent years, we've been focusing on the idea of establishing an income floor here in Oregon, what's called a guaranteed income. Those are the areas where we tend to focus on the most. But ultimately, our goal is to make sure that all Oregonians have a real opportunity to thrive and that the economy is working for all of us.
So you mentioned being nonpartisan. How long has the center been around?
Oh, great question. We are celebrating our 25th anniversary.
25, all
yes. And so it's a
I'd
great
have brought birthday cake if I was.
Yeah. So it's a great, and so we've been in some of the very important policy battles at the state level in terms of things like wages, tax policy, all these years. And, we're really proud of the work that we've accomplished.
So when you all are advising policymakers, is that kind of one of the main functions, is to advise policymakers?
We definitely focus as to what's happening in the legislature. So we will say, for example, publish a report on a particular issue that might be moving or that would be good for lawmakers to know about. And certainly we share with all lawmakers, policymakers, but the public as well. I mean, all of the research that we publish is available on our website because we believe that it's of interest to all Oregonians to know what's happening in Salem and the issues that affect their lives.
Yeah. And so you advise governors, you advise legislators, just kind of across the board, even in city and county and local folks?
We mostly stick to state level issues. Yeah, we're often approach folks wanting to discuss some tax issue that might affect their city or their county, and we wish we could help, but there's only so much that the capacity will stretch. So we tend to just stick to state level policy and federal policy as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I recently saw, and maybe I step back for a second. One of the challenging things in today's media and news and information environment is getting clean information that is, trustworthy, that you can rely on, because there's just so much different information out there these days and different agendas that people have and other things. But anyway, I saw this, or I read or heard this statistic, I don't recall, that the inequality in Oregon is actually some of the lowest inequality in terms of income inequality in the country. Is that accurate?
There was a recent piece published by the Oregonian showing this. We have not looked at the state to state comparison on inequality. I will say that analysis makes sense, even though I can't say for sure that it's correct. But it sort of makes sense because of some of the things that Oregon is doing and doing well. So that said, even if inequality in Oregon is lower than in most other places, it's still extreme. Yeah. It's still through the roof. It's just that everywhere else, it's even worse.
Even worse.
And this sort of gets to, I think, some of the things that we're going to talk about, that issue, income inequality, wealth inequality, that is the main economic challenge that we face, both nationally and at the state level. And unless we deal with that issue, there will be there's no way of establishing economic security for people. There's no way that the vast majority of people in our state and our country can really thrive. And so that really has to be the focus. When you talk about prosperity, that has to be the focus of policymakers.
Yeah. And when I read that, I was like, well, that's good. And then like you, I was like, maybe that does make sense. I know that Oregon, I mean, I've been here for 20 years now, and I've worked in a whole number of jobs and fields and everything else. And we are a very labor friendly state in terms of unions and workers' rights and compensation and things like that. So I was like, oh, maybe that is playing a big role in this less inequality than other states are experiencing.
Yeah, that's right. And that would be one of the things when I say that it sort of makes sense without digging into the exact analysis that was done. But yes, the fact that we have a higher share of workers who are unionized. Unions increase wages for people who are unionized, but not just that, for the broader community as well. So it has like a spillover effect. That certainly has been well established by the research. That would be one factor, that we have a stronger minimum wage than most other places. That it's clear that even though low-income workers here in Oregon are struggling, and there's no question that they make higher wages here than they do in most other places. And that's a very good thing. That speaks highly of our state in terms of the values that we want to advance, in terms of making life better for people. That we have somewhat, and again, this will be probably a topic of conversation, but our tax system in terms of its progressivity, and I should say Oregon does not have ultimately, when you look at all state and local taxes added up together, we have a slightly regressive tax system, but nevertheless, it's less regressive than most other places. We're less bad than most other places, if you will.
We're less bad.
We're less bad. and so I think that would probably be another factor that I would cite.
Yeah, well, and that makes sense to me. I mean, we don't have a sales tax. And, nationally, most states do. And it, obviously it's clear that a sales tax is a very regressive tax, that the people have the least choice in how much money, a percent of their income they have to spend on just the basics, are going to pay more sales tax as a percent of their income than, higher earners. So clearly a regressive thing. So that's maybe a positive for us.
It's absolutely a positive. Yeah. I mean, in this, the personal income tax is our main source of revenue for the Oregon General Fund, what people call the state budget. And it is, because it is an income tax, you can make it progressive. That's one of the great things about about an income tax, that you can ask proportionally more of the rich than of the poor. And that's huge in terms of both just having a tax system that works well for the whole state, for the community. That's the good news. The bad news is that our personal income tax system is only mildly progressive. There's not a lot of room separating those in the moderate income folks to well-off folks. So it's progressive, but it's mildly progressive, and so that's one of the areas where we would want to work on.
Well, I want to start getting us to the report, the Prosperity Council report that, I had Curtis Robinhold, one of the co-chairs, on here to discuss in our first episode of the season. And I'm so happy that you're here to give a different viewpoint and perspective, because I think it can be hard for people who, have a day job, right? And they're not reading a 400-page report to really know what they take away from this and what's important to them from this report and what's not. But before we jump right into the report, some of the recommendations, I want to get your take on those things. I want to step back a little bit to what I would term the vibes, or what maybe others would term as the business climate in Oregon, because I think a lot of, even the fact that the report was asked for by the governor was instigated by this idea that maybe the business climate in Oregon is not good or not healthy. I mean, do you feel like that's where this is coming out of?
Absolutely. The big corporate lobby in Oregon has been pounding the table for years, but especially in the most recent period, about Oregon's business climate. And I think that is a big part of what drove both the creation of what was initially the Prosperity Roadmap, issued by the governor's office, and that subsequently led to the Prosperity Council. And so that idea of Oregon has a bad business climate is what's been driving a lot of this. And the reality is that this whole notion of business climate, for one, it's a very incoherent concept. It's a made-up concept by lobbyists. I think that's the main thing that people need to understand, by corporate lobbyists. There's my colleague pointed out that he was reading the book Nixonland, and that the writer points out that this notion of business climate came out in the 1950s. It was conjured up by GE to basically describe states with low taxes and no unions. I mean, and so that's their concept of what a good business climate is.
Business climate,
yeah. And then in the later on in the 1970s, you started to get these indices, rankings of business climates. Again, rankings made up by business lobbies or by think tanks funded by corporations, purporting to establish which states have a business climate. And it's an incoherent idea to think that there is such a thing as a business climate, because in every state, businesses are affected differently by taxes. Some here, and we see it quite well here in Oregon. So my wife has her own business. She's a sole proprietor. She's a mental health therapist. And how the tax system affects her is very different how the tax system affects Nike and Intel.
Right.
Right. It's just completely different. So where is the business? It's the business climate.
For who?
Yeah, for who? Where it's just like a very incoherent idea. And but even that aside, it's just kind of, you see that there's not much substance behind it, because then there's multiple rankings that purport to establish the business climate of states, and in some Oregon does better than in others, and in some it does very poorly, and some it does better. So there's no agreement as to what the business climate is, even if there were such a thing. And ultimately, those rankings reflect the biases of the people who write it. So if you put into the assume that in fact in the way that you determine the rankings, you score states that have higher taxes on rich people and on corporations, that's a bad thing, then you're going to do poorly on these rankings, regardless of how well the people in the state are doing. And so the main business climate ranking that initially this prosperity roadmap pointed to, and that Oregon Business and Industries has been citing over and over again, is a ranking by CNBC, a business, the business network.
Sure, yeah.
And that somehow they're the authority. So this one showed Oregon doing not so well, and so in which states? But when you would look at the states in their top 10, and this is what the initial roadmap said, we should aim for being at the top 10 of the CNBC business rankings, right? I mean, that's kind of weird, but if you look at it's totally arbitrary. But if you sort of look at the states that are there, like the top state was North Carolina. And the reason why they appear there is because for the past decade, they've been slashing taxes on the rich and on corporations. Yeah. And so, according to their model, they're going to come out on top. But when you look at the things that matter to people in terms of personal income growth, in terms of wages for low income people, in terms of having a strong minimum wage, in terms of health insurance coverage, in terms of life expectancy. I mean, life expectancy is probably one of the best indicators of how well your population is doing. Yeah. And Oregon did better than all but maybe one of those states in all of the things that ultimately truly matter to people. Yeah. So it's an incoherent thought, and even if you accept, take seriously the rankings, you show that it's just a mess. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, what you're saying makes me think, and of course, all kinds of different outlets and different places have different rankings, like you say, and it depends. I've seen Oregon and I've seen Portland rank very highly on some lists of places to live, for quality of life, things like that. And I've seen us rank very low. It depends on who the outlet is and what, I guess, axe they have to grind. But is there a useful concept in ranking states for whatever purpose? I mean, in terms of whether businesses should be here or quality of life or things, is that a useful exercise, or is that just kind of, I don't know, maybe it leads to incentives and outcomes? So, for example, CNBC puts out a ranking and they say, well, here's how we're going to measure this. And states suddenly, like Oregon, have a goal of being in the top 10. We're going to change policy to fit a ranking. I mean, that seems like a dangerous game to play.
It can be a very dangerous thing. I mean, I think that there's things to learn when you see how states are doing and sort of try to figure out why and what's working well. I mean, I guess it ultimately depends on what your values are and what you're aiming for. If the goal is to improve the quality of life for the people in the state, then these rankings would send you in the opposite direction. And that's really the problem and danger with these of taking them seriously, because ultimately they become a race to the bottom. And that's really what they boil down to, that if we just cut taxes on corporations and on the rich, somehow we are winning the race. Well, no. I mean, the reality is that is not, if this is a competition, this is not a game you want to play, much less win, because you end up, and it was interesting that Curtis Robinhold, when he spoke with you a few weeks ago, all of a sudden, he says, and I shouldn't say that because I don't know where he came from and if he had accepted this CNBC business rankings. But it was interesting that he said, we don't want to look at North Carolina. We don't want to look at Texas. Oh, but these were the states were in the top 10. Why are we all of a sudden not looking at them? Well, I think it goes again because it's completely arbitrary, the comparisons. And after we and others pointed out how dumb the results were in terms of sort of like who you're putting out as a model for us to emulate, I think that then the narrative started shifting. Oh, well, we're going to look at these other states. And so I think that the focus should be not, yes, let's learn from what may work in other states, but in terms of the things that really matter, like, are we increasing life expectancy for people? Are people more economically secure? Are families thriving? Can they afford healthcare? What's the health insurance coverage like? Is college affordable? Is childcare accessible? The things that really matter to families. Those are important to analyze and see what's working. In terms of tax rates, that's just a race to the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, we've talked on this program with some other guests about programs like Preschool for All, for example, which is here in Multnomah County, and gives people preschool access for their kids. I put my kids, through preschool and had to pay for that. And it's expensive, like very expensive. You're talking about, up to maybe sometimes in excess of $2,000 per child per, month, $24,000 a year. It's incredibly, out of reach for some families. And that means that people might not enter the workforce or get out of the workforce or, hopefully lean on other family members and grandparents and things if they have that privilege to have folks. And it's been frustrating to me. The conversation around Preschool for All has been, oh, this is, people are leaving our state, they're leaving our county, they're leaving this place, instead of embracing it as a competitive advantage to, positively advertise to people across the country. Man, where you want to raise a family is Portland, Oregon, because they're going to help you get through preschool, which is going to allow you to, take that job, do the thing that you want to pursue your thing, because the childcare portion is going to be taken care of. And I think so much of the framing that I'm hearing today, this business climate framing, is focused on one side of the scale in terms of, oh, well, the tax and the negative in this, when, where we invest our dollars is just as important for establishing, hey, this is the environment that you're in and you get these things, like you should come here. But I don't see us or our leaders leaning into that competitive advantage narrative.
I couldn't agree more. I think that one of the things that's most disappointing about this whole Prosperity Council is just that rather than focusing on that issue, and we do think that what one of the goals should be for the state is to make Oregon the best place to raise a family and to and a place to live, to have a high quality of life. That is not only great for the population of a state, for the people who live here, that is going to make a real difference in their lives, but also for businesses. If you want to start a business, if you want to, like where you live and when you grow your business, making it the best place to raise a family would be a great goal. And certainly having universal preschool should be one of those goals. And it's interesting that if you sort of look into the detail of the Prosperity Council's recommendations, they point out very clearly that one of the things that businesses are saying is that they're having a hard time finding workers because of the problem of childcare. But that finding is nowhere to be found reflected in the recommendations.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's dive into the report. So we've kind of been talking a little bit about the general background, the whole business climate idea that has led to needing a report, needing an analysis. One of the things that I want to talk about is this concept of, investability, that Oregon is a place where people don't want to make investments. But before we get kind of into the critical analysis, were there things in the report that you're like, you know what? Yeah, I can agree with that, or that makes sense to me, or maybe I would have pushed a little harder on this. I mean, what did you see good in the report, if anything?
Well, I was glad to see their acknowledgement of the importance of childcare. I think in terms of the specific recommendations, there's a recommendation that Oregon should invest more in higher education. Mm-hmm. I think that definitely is a worthy goal. Again, having a highly educated workforce is one of the best things that we can do for the state's economy, not only in addition for the benefits that it brings to the people that you're gonna, the people of the state. So we definitely support that. The only, the only quibble is the sort of weird way in which the goal was stated, and that like it's something like strategically align Oregon's higher ed funding to Washington and California. I mean, it's sort of like strategically aligned. I mean, so does that mean that if Washington and California reduce higher ed funding, we're going to do it as well? I don't know why we would phrase it that way, but if they had just said increase funding, yes, let's do it. We sign us up. That I think is the most interesting proposal that was in there. There were a number of recommendations, some of them which it's not our policy area, let others sort of comment on those. I would put some of those in that bucket. Some that sound reason to have a reasonable discussion about some of those proposals. For example, this idea of establishing changing Business Oregon, the sort of the economic development agency of this arm of the state, into some new structure. Apparently, some businesses feel that it's not working well. That's a reasonable conversation to have for sure. I do think that, again, some of the, when you look at the fine print, it does raise some questions. For example, they make it very clear that that the board of that entity is only going to be staffed by business leaders and innovators or something like that. I think workers should have a voice into economic development policy in the state. That there's academics who may have some interesting ideas. So I think that there should be, it should reflect a broader constituency. It should reflect more who we are as Oregonians, not just clearly business community has a lot to say and useful insights into economic development, but they're not they're not the only ones who care about or have ideas about it. So. So again, I think there's some policies. Then again, there was one about like, reducing regulations by 20%. If there are, ideas, if there are some regulations, and by the way, regulations are protections. They protect the environment. They protect our drinking water. They protect, that's what they are. They protect the community and people. And so there's a reason why we have regulations. It's true, some of these regulations that are on the books, they may have outlived their usefulness. Maybe they were now well crafted and there's problems with them. That should be up for discussion. We should regularly be looking at our laws to see if they're working well or not. But simply saying, we're going to cut them by 20%. It sounds kind of doji, like kind of Elon Musk coming in and say, we're going to slash it by, $3 trillion, whatever it was that he said.
Well, for example, I just saw a video that the mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani, just put out, and he's talking about reducing regulations. And the regulations that he's pinpointing is the state of New York requires a registration to sell ice cream. The city of New York requires another one to sell ice cream. For example, he's like, we don't need two regulations that are kind of doing the same thing, maybe slightly different. And now you've got to register here, you got to register there. Maybe their, freezer calculation is 1 degree less or more. He's like, no, we don't need to do that. So, I mean, clearly there's a good case for re-examining and seeing, all right, this is taken care of by another thing here. And so maybe we don't need it anymore. But what I hear you saying is like, yeah, let's do that. If there are things that aren't working or outdated or maybe overlap needlessly, great. But pinning an arbitrary, like 1 out of 5 regulations must go seems not a goal.
It's completely arbitrary to say, 20%. Why not 25 or why not 2%? I mean, it's just like there's no rhyme or reason for that. And so that's problematic. But in terms of just the general idea of like, we should look at our regulations. Are they working well for our state or not? Are they creating unnecessary roadblocks, whatever? Of course, that's completely reasonable. And there should be a discussion on that. Just put forward the specifics of what's not working well, and then you think it's not working well, and then let the legislative process take effect.
Well, now I want to dive into the things that you found problematic in the report, or that you didn't agree with. You recently wrote an article talking about the bait and switch argument, the sleight of hand of this report. And so I want you to get into that, but let's start with something you've already brought up, which is the composition of the folks who wrote this report. You mentioned just a second ago, we're talking about who should lead Business Oregon. It should be a broader diversity of, workers, consumers, other people who bring expertise, academics, and business, of course. That was not the composition of the folks who wrote this report. What's your reaction to the composition? And then let's get into some of the critique you have of the actual findings.
Yeah, the Prosperity Council was by and large made up of corporate representatives, business interests, and only 2 members of labor were included. And so clearly the deck was stacked. I mean, to a particular point of view and narrative. And again, I think we already talked a little bit about the narrative that had been building up to this moment. And so I think that was already in some ways baked in. So the recommendations that came out were absolutely no surprise because of what had transpired before in the lead up to this and who was included in those who put out the report. And interestingly, in the area that definitely we can weigh in the most, the tax recommendations, the 2 labor folks did not agree with, they dissented from this portion of it because it is clearly very one-sided based on the putting forward the wishes of the big corporate lobby. It's the same things that they have been saying over and over again over the years, and they've been sort of louder about it in the most recent period.
That's interesting. I mean, so what I hear you saying is they already knew the result that they wanted to arrive at, and then they put together a council, talked to people across the state, held hearings, and ended up at the result that they originally wanted to arrive at. Do you feel like this was just a kind of window dressing to make it seem as if this was an investigatory process, but in fact, they already knew what the answer was going to be before they even got started? Or do you feel like, is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, I have no inside knowledge as to, what exactly, happened or what was in the minds of the people who put to the report. But it's certainly, it would not surprise me if that were in fact the case. Let's just put it that way. Yeah. And it's interesting that after the report came out, Oregon Business and Industries, which is the big corporate lobby, and it's the lobby for the biggest corporations that do business here in Oregon, came out with a statement saying, we fully, we agree with the recommendations, and they're saying the same things we've been saying for a long time. And that's absolutely right. So thank you for acknowledging that point.
All right. Well, let's get into some of the specifics. One of the things that Curtis brought up and then it's highlighted in the report is an individual here in Oregon making, I think he said $40,000 a year as income, is taxed at a higher rate than they are in other comparable states like Washington or California. And they kind of hold that up as an example of our tax structure being out of whack. What do you think about that example? And do you arrive at the same conclusion?
So there's, in terms of that specific point, there's 2 things to say. The first is that the analysis that we have seen, that the way they arrive at that conclusion that a middle class household here in Oregon pays a higher overall tax rate than a middle income household in Washington or California, it's not clear how exactly they arrive at that analysis. The analysis that we've seen by a very credible shop that has been doing that kind of analysis for a long time, the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy out of Washington, D.C., they take a look at the tax structures of all the states, and they look at all the taxes that people pay in those states. So we talked about the personal income tax, which is the main driver of revenue for the state budget. But that's not the only tax that we pay here. There's other state taxes, local taxes, for example, property taxes, excise taxes, which are like taxes on gasoline or whatever. So they add up all the state and local taxes and figure out what's the overall effective tax rate. So they do that for Oregon, and they do that for all the other states. And when you look at that analysis, a middle income household in Oregon pays a lower effective tax rate than their counterparts in Washington and California. In Washington, they don't have a personal income tax,
Right.
but they have a sales tax, and they have other taxes that are quite regressive. Regressive meaning they hit low and middle income people harder than those at the top. And so Washington has a very regressive tax structure. We spoke earlier how Oregon has a less bad tax structure in terms of its regressivity. Well, Washington has one of the worst, probably by this analysis, the second most regressive tax structure. So if you're a low income person, you're much worse off in Washington state than you are here. And if you're middle income, you're also worse off by a little bit next door. So there's the question of like, it's not true what they're saying.
Okay.
But putting aside the accuracy of that claim, the problem with them raising this point is that it's the bait and switch.
Exactly.
It's that they talk about it, and this is not the only piece of the bait and switch. They also cite other figures about 2 out of 5 Oregon households don't make enough to make ends meet.
Mm-hmm.
This is based on an analysis put out by the United Way called the ALICE Index. Excellent analysis. We refer to it often. So I was, when I started reading the report, I thought, oh, wow, that's great that they're citing this.
That they're going to take this on.
Yeah, but yeah, right. What are you proposing to deal with this issue?
Yeah.
The answer is nothing, because they sort of cite these, there's a lot of language that seems to suggest concern for the economic challenges that families are facing here. And, supposedly the taxes that middle income households pay. But then when you look at the specific recommendations that have nothing to, they offer nothing to middle income families. So when you look at the specifics, they have in the near term,
Mm-hmm.
for the next legislative session, they have 4 recommendations. One of them is reinstating a tax break for venture capitalists that the legislature got rid of in the most recent legislative session. It's called the QSBS. And 94% of the tax benefits of this tax break go to people making over $1 million a year. So we're talking about a tax break for super rich, wealthy investors. That's who benefits from it. They want to put it back, not a tax cut for the middle class. There's I'll
just because I think I want to go a little bit point for point here on that one. When I asked Curtis about that, he said, well, that is people who are taking a risk on a business. So they are putting their labor in exchange, instead of getting a salary, they're getting these shares that could eventually, if the business succeeds, pay them off in the future. And it was more, I think the example he was thinking of and explaining in his mind was more like if you and I were like, hey, I got a business idea, let's do a startup, and we're not going to make any money for a little while. But we're going to have shares of this business that we're going to split. And someday if we make money, boy, you and I will be great. Like, is that just a bad example for changing this policy? Because what I hear you saying is 94% is actually not going to you and me sitting across the table thinking of a new business. It's going to venture capitalists who are picking investments and are able to, invest capital in order and take shares for prospective wins.
No, so the founders under this QSBS tax break, the founders would get a benefit as well. They would get the tax break as well as the venture capitalists that give you money. Mm-hmm. So I think that there is a certain, I don't know what I would call it, not arrogance, but a certainly kind of disconnect into thinking that only that they're the only ones who take risks. Mm-hmm. Like, all of us take risks in our lives into what profession we decide to work on. And, to say that somehow these folks need a special tax break to do what they want to do, there's clearly, I think it's privileging a certain group of people over others. And the reality is that they are already privileged, because the QSBS is a tax break for capital gains. And at the federal level, capital gains are already massively favoring, right, in terms of their tax rates. Like, mm-hmm. And that's the reason why, a working, someone who earns a wage, who earns a paycheck, often ends up paying a higher overall tax rate than a wealthy investor, because
Right.
capital gains pay a much lower tax rate. And so this is just piling on. It's yet another capital gains tax break, right? So
And is this an example of a race to the bottom? Because I think I heard Curtis saying is we need to be competitive with other states. And the fact that we disengaged from that federal tax cut that QSBS was putting on us, but our other competitive states have it, that means that people won't do those startups here in Oregon.
they do. I mean, there's startups all over the place. I mean, Joe Courtright Joe Courtright is an economist. He runs the website City Observatory. He has a lot of information on how Oregon has been creating manufacturing businesses here, a higher clip. He's got other information in terms of business startups. Oregon attracts startups. That's not a problem. It's this idea that somehow tax rates drive where businesses locate, and
Right.
there's a ton of research showing that it just doesn't. That's not what ultimately matters for where you start a business. It's where your customers might be. It's where your family lives, your family connections, your networks. And so we can get, and the reality is that these investors will still get huge tax breaks
Right.
at the federal level, because Oregon got rid of, it kind of gets a little complicated, but this is not a tax break that anyone in Oregon said, let's do it. It's a federal tax break that has been in the books, and it was established at the federal level, and it was expanded a year ago by the big Trump tax and budget bill. It made it even more costly. Oregon connects automatically to the federal tax code in many ways, and so when that big federal tax bill got enacted, Oregon again automatically connected to that even more costly QSBS tax break. No one in Oregon said, let's do that. Let's see if that's a good idea. Let's debate it. No, it automatically became part of our tax code,
Right.
because the legislature can always say, no, thanks, we're going to depart, but they have to take affirmative action
Right.
to disconnect. And so they didn't do that until the most recent session when they finally disconnected from it.
I want to get you back on, because I took us down this path. I want to get you back onto the bait and switch.
Sure.
So we were talking about, the report says, hey, we've got to look out for low income and middle income people. Here's an example. And now here's the 4 tax policies that we're proposing in the short term. So we talked about the QSBS, but I want you to keep.
Yeah. Another one is weakening the Oregon estate tax. And that is the only tax that we have here in Oregon that applies to the wealthiest folks. That goes to the wealth. So it's and so only 5% of all estates pay this, and it's really aimed. It's one of the most progressive forms of taxation that we have here in Oregon. This would weaken that important revenue source for schools and other basic services. So again, not anything aimed at the middle class. Would only benefit possibly the richest, the wealthiest 5% of households.
Do we worry about wealth flight? I mean, the example that was given in that interview was, well, wealthy people just leave. They go to Arizona so that they can avoid our estate tax. Do we end up losing anyway because they're leaving, or is that overblown?
If they were going to leave, they were already left. But the reality is that there's a lot of research in terms of the migration of rich people, and rich people rarely move. Rich people move less than lower income people. Most of the people who move are young and lower income. They move at much higher rates. And the research shows that, yes, some rich people move, not very often. And often it's not because of taxes. It's rarely because of taxes that if they move. And the reason is because they have built their business and their wealth in a particular place. So it's hard to move. And so their families are located here. They're very rooted in place. So it's not, some people are going to leave, but overall, our state is better off by having a revenue source that aims at the wealthiest folks, those who can most afford it, to fund better schools, to fund better healthcare, to fund all the essential services that provide quality of life.
So continuing on, we've touched on the estate tax, the QSBS. What other bait and switch things did you see in there?
Well, there were the other two pieces were the corporate a weakening. I should say the language was a little more vague on this as to whether it's actual weakening, but certainly changing the corporate activities tax again. But that's aimed at corporations, not middle class households. The other one is expanding a research and development tax credit for corporations. Again, not something aimed at the middle class. So in their near-term priorities, nothing for the middle class. And then they also propose establishing a task force to do comprehensive tax reform, to sort of look comprehensively at our tax system. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I do think that we should periodically look at our tax system to see what's working and what's not. But the main thing that they propose for that is something that has come up in your podcast before, I think with John Isaacs. He's talked about basically, and I think he said this, but certainly this is what's in the recommendations of the Prosperity Council, lowering personal income tax rates. Paired with, they won't say the words, they call it a broad-based tax, but what they're talking about is establishing a sales tax.
A sales tax.
Yeah. And so as we discussed before, sales tax is very regressive. It hits low and moderate income people much higher than, much harder than it does those at the top. And so what it amounts to is basically a tax shift from those at the top to those who make less.
Yeah. Yeah. If I was going to characterize the argument that I thought was being made around the Prosperity Council, so they lift up the middle income folks and the lower income folks and say, hey, we can do better for them. And there's a lot of nice language in the report that says, prosperity means prosperity for everybody and that all boats rise and all this. I guess what I would imagine if they were sitting here and saying, well, this is how we see that, is it almost goes back to business climate, right? Our competitiveness. If people won't come here and locate businesses here, or if businesses are leaving, then we're going to have less revenue at the state, less income tax, less workers, getting good jobs here. And so, yes, we are focusing on the middle income people because we're going to incentivize more investment. Two questions on that. One, do you think that these proposals incentivize more investment? Does this make us a more competitive, attractive state to invest? And two, even if it does, is that really going to lift all boats? Is that really going to impact the $40,000 a year earner?
No and no.
Okay. Yeah, unpack that.
So in terms of is it going to make our state grow more?
We're going to go up.
Where our economy is going to. No, the reality is, so let me step back. Oregon, when you look at the long run, and we published a report recently on this, from 1997, and that's when the data series begins, so that's why it's 1997, to 2024, Oregon's economy has grown faster than most other states. And we had been growing even faster. If you looked at if the cutoff point were like around 2020, 21, we would be like, the top handful of states in terms of economic growth, in terms of personal income growth, in terms of productivity growth. Oregon, over the long haul, has done extremely well, even though we have a quote unquote bad business climate. Again, I would recommend the work of Joe Courtwright. He's also published a lot of information on just how well Oregon has done compared to other states and a lot of these economic metrics. So, and so even though the business community complains about Oregon's personal income tax rates and other things about our tax structure, Oregon has done extremely well over the long haul. But what ultimately they don't say it, but when you look at the recommendations and what's really behind it is this idea that if we just cut taxes on rich people and on corporations, prosperity will flow broadly. And this is the same old story we've been hearing for over 4 decades. of trickle down economics or neoliberalism or whatever you want to call it. The idea that if only we cut taxes on the rich and corporations, we'll all be better off. But the record is very clear by now that incomes for Oregonians, and this is not just the case in Oregon, this is all across the country, wages have been stagnant. Wages and income have been stagnant over all these decades, and all the income gains have been flowing to those at the top.
Yeah.
And there is a clear connection between tax policy. It's not the only driver, but it's clear that tax policy and all the tax cuts, especially at the federal level, have a lot to do with how it is that economic inequality has gotten so out of whack. There was a story I saw recently that now the wealth inequality has surpassed levels of, by one analysis, the levels of the Gilded Age, the days of Rockefeller and so on. So that's how bad it has gotten. We momentarily had a trillionaire in place. So that is the product of this idea that we just cut taxes on the rich, we reduce regulations, we decimate unions, and somehow we're better off. No, the reality is that it has gotten us into a situation where economic inequality is out of control, and it's completely interconnected. The economic insecurity, we talked about how 2 out of 5 Oregon families doesn't make enough to make ends meet. That is directly connected to the fact that so much of the productivity gains of the wealth created by people are flowing to just a few, as opposed to being shared broadly.
So we've been talking about a lot of the recommendations and, the idea that our business climate is, whether that's a good measure or not. But I'll say probably why I think some of this is resonating with people and maybe even Portlanders specifically is because, we can see with our own eyes that Portland has experienced some challenges over the past couple of years. I mean, you look at just the real estate market, for example, and we're all seeing giant buildings like Big Pink sell for pennies on the dollar, which of course I don't own any of those big buildings, so it doesn't impact me directly, but it does seem like an indicator, a very visible indicator that things are not going as well in Portland. And then we have some of our bigger industries that have faced some headwinds, Nike, Intel, chip manufacturing. So, I mean, there's clearly something that is resonating with people in here. What's your analysis of that and whether or not this actually addresses any of that or if it should?
Yeah. So as we were discussing before, I was going over some of the information before that, when you look at the long run, Oregon's economy has done extremely well compared to other states. Now, if you look at the near term, there's no question that our economy has faced some bumps for sure. So there's still positive data to be found in that in terms of our, for example, personal income growth we're still doing better than in the national economy. And if you're going to look at maybe just one measure, like the income that flows to people, that is a pretty good measure. But nevertheless, and there's others, again, that one can point to. But nevertheless, I think it's important to recognize that, yes, we have faced Oregon has faced some challenges in the near term. What's unfortunate is that the business community and the Prosperity Council don't really probe into the reasons for why. They come up with these excuses of our business climate and so on that have no real substance to them, instead of looking at the data as to what the real drivers of the economic weakness is.
Okay.
And it's pretty clear. Oregon is one of the most trade-dependent states of any in the nation. And
I have a friend, she owns a winery. And when all these tariffs got rolled out nationally, I mean, and then our trade, I think a significant portion of her wine went to Canada, right? And then all the Canadian back and forth and tariffs and everything hit. And, she was hit hard, and wine is a huge industry here in Oregon. So that's just an example on top of my mind.
But that's actually one example that I wanted to bring up, because the Oregon Wine Board just put out a press release this month, early July. It said, quote, Oregon wine exports, which had historically been growing steadily, decreased by 29%, driven by a near total loss of access to the Canadian market.
There you go.
So yes, your friend is absolutely right, and the Oregon Wine Board fully recognizes this. And obviously, it's not just wine.
Right.
Oregon is one of the most trade-dependent states in the country, and it's important to understand. Obviously, tariffs and all this has been all over the news over the past year since the second Trump administration. But these began before COVID, during the first Trump administration. Mm-hmm. And so the state tariffs began back then. And so the Oregon state economists said, when they were testifying before the legislature in the report that they gave to the legislature, the state was handily outpacing the national economy before tariffs began, and then quickly downshifted the pace of growth by about 2.5 percentage points by mid-2019. So tariff policy has obviously hit Oregon harder, has hit the entire country, but Oregon more than most places. So yeah, why is our economy not doing as well as it was before? Part of the reason is trade policy. Another big factor in why our economy is not as robust is because our two biggest private sector employees, you already mentioned them, Nike and Intel, have been laying off thousands of people.
Yeah.
And they've been doing that for a few years now. And these, not only we looked at the figures, like in the past couple of years, they account for like something like 30% of all large layoffs in the state. So that's big.
Yeah. Not
only that, those layoffs at these big employers have a huge spillover effect into the community. So these, when you lay off these workers, they're no longer, you may not, the suppliers that are supplying your company, you're maybe not buying as much from them, or those workers who are laid off are no longer, frequenting the coffee shop or the restaurant or whatever. So it has a huge spillover effect. According to Intel, I mean, these are their figures, that for every one job they create, 13 jobs are created in the community.
Wow.
That's their figure. But another analysis shows that in the manufacturing sector, which is what Intel is, and that for every job lost in a manufacturing business, 7.5 jobs are lost in the community. So again, we've seen thousands of jobs lost in Nike and Intel. And so it's having a huge spillover effect in the community. And the thing to understand, and this is good, sort of goes back to the whole issue of taxes, is that the reason why Nike and Intel are laying off people is because of the business's decisions that they made. Mm-hmm. There were clearly some missteps there. Intel missed some of the AI chip growth, all that aspect of it. They were left behind to a significant extent. Maybe they're catching up now, but at the very least, they missed the boat on that one. And in terms of Intel, in terms of Nike, they apparently, according to the reporting of the Oregonian, they made also some serious business missteps in terms of how they would retail to the customer and whatnot. So the record is very clear as to the reasons why these companies haven't done well.
Not the progressive policies of Oregon that helps, wages and labor and things like that.
Not at all. And most certainly not tax policy, because both of these companies derive huge advantages from Oregon's tax system.
Yeah.
That is absolutely clear. They, because of a change that was done a couple of decades ago, their corporate income tax contributions absolutely plummeted. They pay very little.
Yeah.
They get huge property tax breaks, at least Intel does. It's one of the biggest recipients of property tax breaks. And they pay no sales taxes here, which sales taxes tend to be like 30%, a third of the taxes that businesses normally pay. So they pay none here, whereas they wouldn't somewhere else. So they derive huge tax advantages from Oregon's tax structure, so much so that in 2012, Nike somehow strong-armed Governor Kitzhaber to rush legislation to lock in the tax structure for them for 30 years, I think it was. So they liked it so much that they were going to make absolutely sure that it was not changed for them, only them. But then Intel came in and said, we want the same deal, and they got the same deal. No other two companies got the deal, only those two. And so it's clear that they like the tax structure that we have. Taxes have nothing to do with their economic woes. And so I get it. And these facts are very inconvenient for the business lobby. So, and it's not obviously not just Intel. I mean, for for manufacturers, for exporters, that's the tax structure that they enjoy as well. So, so yeah, that's that. I mean, those are two of the key drivers. Obviously, the Portland, as you probably know better than most, got hit pretty hard during the pandemic, and that obviously has affected, business here in the community. But again, an external factor that has nothing to do really with
Right.
policies here.
Yeah. So to your point, it's like, okay, maybe we are identifying some of the headwinds and or the fact that we're experiencing challenges, but the cure that's being prescribed has nothing to do with the cause of our challenges. If tariffs and those policies, and then just business decisions made by some of our biggest employers are causing some of the things that people are seeing right now and the challenges that we're facing, lowering the QSBS or the estate tax or some of these other recommendations are not going to change or get at the underlying causes of what we are facing.
Oh, absolutely. Again, as Oregon Business and Industry said, it's the same thing they've been arguing for years. That's what they're still pushing for. It has nothing to do with it. It won't help the state and in fact, it'll have a cost to Oregonians in either reduce funding for essential services like schools and healthcare and whatnot, or if they get their way, it means a tax shift where
right.
low and middle income Oregonians will be paying more, so to offset the loss of taxes collected from the most well-off and corporations.
Let's rewind the clock. We're going to go back in time. Instead of Governor Kotek putting together this prosperity council, she calls you, Juan Carlos, and says, "Hey, I need a prosperity report." What does the vision for the Oregon Center of Public Policy, what would that prosperity vision look like for Oregon? What do we need to do to truly be a prosperous state?
So we would, as we were discussing before, I think that setting some goals around making Oregon the best place to raise a family, the best place to start a business. I mean, those things are worthy goals that would really improve the quality of life for our people. And it wouldn't be just beneficial for businesses, although I think that it would happen, but it would be, I mean, that's the place where you want to live. And so I think some of the top things that might fall into that would be significant investments in education, from early education, which has a huge payoff. So preschool. I mean, I think setting the goal, and this is something that Governor Kotek didn't mention at some point, setting up a commission to study universal preschool throughout Oregon. I think that's definitely a worthy goal. But all the way through higher ed and through apprenticeship. Not everybody can or needs to go to college to do well and thrive. So having a strong apprenticeship program, but it's better funding for higher ed for sure. So that whole continuum of education, there's research showing that the states with the strongest economies in terms of economic growth tend to be those with the most highly educated population. It's also a workforce issue, and for preschool, so that a parent preschool is very expensive, so it keeps at least one parent from being able to join the workforce. So that would be part of it. But even going earlier than that, childcare is prohibitively expensive.
So as you're talking, Juan Carlos, some of the things in my mind that I'm thinking about is this report, this Prosperity Council, focuses on kind of the top driving wealth for the bottom. And what I hear you saying is, instead of that, why don't we focus on the bottom, on the people that have to do the work? Let's become at a competitive advantage to our sister states. If people are looking at lists of places to make investments, let's get on the list where it says this is the best place to raise a family. This is the best place to get an educated workforce. This is the best place for health of your labor force to be taken care of. Let's attract businesses by investing in the base instead of trying to attract some smaller businesses and investment and hope that those benefits trickle down to the rest of us. Is that kind of the vision of the Oregon Center of Public Policy in terms of a progressive prosperity vision?
Yeah, rather than having a race to the bottom, we should be having a race to the top, if you want to use an analogy of competition. Not that we necessarily should, but yes, in investing in our people and infrastructure is the way we need to go. That is what creates broadly shared prosperity, and it's good for business. When we know that, for example, when during the middle of the 20th century, when tax rates were higher, much higher than they are now at the federal level.
Right.
For example, we had a much more vibrant middle class. Granted, there were groups that were excluded from that prosperity, people of color, but for those who were included in the system, there was broadly shared prosperity, and there were several pillars that were key to that. A strongly progressive tax system was part of it. Big investments in the public sector. You could go to college, almost for free back then.
Yeah.
You also had very strong, high rates of unionization, of workers being able to bargain for higher wages, and that just made it lift up wages for unionized workers and for workers not unionized. So those and at that time the economy grew faster, and the reason is because right now we have there's a lot of talk about the so-called K-shaped economy, where only a narrow few are
right.
consuming, and so it makes it harder for some, if you just don't have the customer base for businesses. So having a much more economically secure, broad middle class, that's really what we should be aiming for, and a highly educated workforce. So if we were to look at sort of the big broad areas of how we can get there, it is through a more progressive tax system that raises the net revenue that we need to invest in these, having a really strong education system and having really good infrastructure. Another pillar would be making it so that workers are able to come together and bargain collectively, or at least work together to push for higher wages and benefits. That has become very difficult under the current federal labor law system. But there's steps that the state can take. And establishing an income floor beneath which no one can fall, so that there's like at least a minimum level of a safety net that will catch you when you fall in hard times. So that's kind of like roughly the outline that we would suggest. But obviously, you need to, for some of these investments, you need to find a way to pay for them. So we would look to especially corporations to contribute more, the rich as well. And the fact is that corporations have been playing games with the tax system for a very long time, shifting profits earned here in the US, shifting them abroad, and using all kinds of tricks to do that. We need to address that. For example, we should be talking about raising the corporate income tax rate, not more tax breaks for corporations. And I would also suggest a policy that I think is long overdue, is that, we have this debate with the big business lobby. They say corporations are paying too much. We say, no, they actually are paying not very much.
Right.
Let's settle the debate. Let's settle it once and for all. Require big corporations to make public their tax returns, how much they pay to the state of Oregon, how much revenue they have, and some key information as to the tax breaks that they use or not. And then we will see, maybe Oregon Business and Industry is correct. They're paying too much. Show us your tax returns. And we can settle
this. Could a state do that? Could Oregon say, we're going to pass that law?
Yeah.
It's a transparency law in the state of Oregon. You have to show us your tax returns.
Oregon can do it. They can require corporations to make it public. And this is a trend that's taking place more so internationally. There's some information at the federal level that's disclosed. But at the state level, it's very opaque.
Well, that's, part of, I think, some of the challenges is the opacity, the lack of information. I was talking to someone yesterday and they said, well, Portland has the PSEF, the climate fund that they do. And they got that funding out of, taxing 1% of, I think it's gross sales tax. I might have that wrong, but 1% of profits of these big corporations to be able to get that fund. and it wildly outperformed their expectations. And the person I was talking to is like, that's just evidence that we had no idea how much money that they were making. And now we are finally starting to know. So it does feel a little bit like, you know, we've got a flashlight in a dark room and we're trying to figure out what things are as opposed to just turning the lights on.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, you know, the story for the past 4.5 decades has been one of like, not just income flowing to the top, but also surging corporate profits.
Yeah.
And so, but somehow, you know, they need more tax breaks. And so that's why having more information would be for the benefit of the state and for the people of Oregon. And as well, and also honestly, to bring some balance to, you know, to see, because of this game of shifting profits abroad, it's a game that only the big corporations can play, the
That's
big
right.
multinational corporations. And it puts local businesses at a disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is also good for a lot of local businesses to have clarity as to what our tax system is doing and what it isn't doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that a lot of Portlanders, myself included, probably everybody, just loves our small business community. It's so diverse. We have so many great businesses, food and everything else. And we want to support those. We want them to be successful, and where we can make things better and allow them to thrive. I think that's a goal and a value of a lot of people in this community.
Yeah. And a lot of them will thrive by having a healthy workforce, a workforce that's not stressed because they're scraping by with, you know, with very low incomes. That so having quality public services is good for business as well. It's good for the employers themselves. A lot of them, like, you know, some of them probably don't have health insurance, you know, and so for them to have health insurance, for them to not be, you know, a lot of people would say, I would, you know, have said, you know, I would start a business, you know, but I stay at my job because I have health coverage. And so, yeah, strong public structures are of benefit to business. I mean, you can't have a functioning economy without a strong, vibrant public sector, or you can have an economy that doesn't run very well. But
I heard someone say this the other day, and it just resonated with me so much. They're like, imagine a world where your healthcare is not predicated on your employment status or which employer you're choosing to work for. What would you do? You know, what job would you pursue? Which industry, which thing would you go after for income if healthcare was not a factor? And I was like, that's so true. I mean, we would make different decisions if healthcare was out of the equation. But because we have this system that says, oh no, your healthcare is dependent on this job, and you're going to, it changes our economy. I mean,
absolutely. I mean, I think that a lot more people would be entrepreneurs.
That's right.
Take a risk if they don't have to know that their family's going to go without health insurance.
100%. All right. Well, I want to wrap us up. Is there anything else that I didn't hit you on this report that you wanted to make sure you get in? And then we're going to talk a little bit about where people can find the Oregon Center for Public Policy.
I think that the biggest failing of the Prosperity Council is that they've just been barking up the wrong tree rather than focusing on the things that really would make our state prosperous for everybody, not just for the relative few. And that really should be the focus. We need to address income inequality and economic insecurity. And that's what I would hope from a body that calls itself the Prosperity Council. So let's hope that there's a Prosperity Council number 2 and
2.0.
2.0. Yeah, there we go.
Well, maybe you can lead the next one. So tell us a little bit about where people can find the Oregon Center for Public Policy. How can people connect with you, learn more?
Yeah, so all of the research that we publish and all the commentaries are available on our website, ocpp.org. We welcome questions, suggestions. We also have a podcast, syndicated radio show podcast that has been alive for 4 or 5 years, I want to say.
Nice.
I've lost track of time. But you can find that on all your, it's called Policy for the People. And you can find it on all the podcast feeds.
Awesome. Well, Juan Carlos, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us today.
Well, it's great. Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
That was Juan Carlos Ordonez from the Oregon Center for Public Policy. We've had 2 different guests on this Prosperity Council report. in two very different readings of the same 400 pages. And honestly, that's the entire point of this show, to have a conversation about what Oregon's path forward should look like and what prosperity will mean for everybody. If you want to check the receipts for yourself, the City Observatory's Joe Courtwright has the detailed writing on this topic, and OCPP's published research on Oregon's actual economic performance and where the state's tax dollars go, and we will have links in the show notes. Whether you're more persuaded by Curtis's competitiveness case or Juan Carlos's fairness case, I hope that this got you thinking harder about what prosperity actually means and who it is for. As always, you can find us on Substack. That's where every single episode lives. You can dig deeper and actually talk back to us. Leave a comment. Tell me who you think was right. Tell me what we're missing and anybody else we need to interview. If you have other ideas for the show, we always welcome your feedback. Please subscribe, follow wherever you get your podcasts, and we will see you next time.